Welcome to The Deep Dive. We're looking at just an incredibly tense situation in the Middle East right now.
Yeah.
Really a knife edge.
Yeah, it feels like one decision, particularly from the U.S. president, could, well, change everything for global security.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So today, that's our mission. Cut through all the noise. We've got a stack of reports, intel assessments, commentary, and we're going to sift through it, pull out the key insights for you. Think of it as your shortcut to, really getting up to speed on this.
And we've looked at a real range of sources for this deep dive, analytical pieces, the latest intelligence briefings, public statements, trying to get that full picture.
Right. Varied perspectives on this whole standoff between the U.S., Israel, and Iran. It's complicated.
Very.
So to get a handle on why it's so tense right now, we have to start with these recent attacks. Direct attacks between Israel and Iran. That's new.
It really is unprecedented. We've seen Israeli strikes targeting Iranian nuclear sites, military facilities. Reports mention a centrifuge production site, even the Tehran Research Center.
And these weren't minor sites, right? Some were actually under IAEA monitoring before.
That's right. Places the International Atomic Energy Agency was watching. So these are significant, not just symbolic strikes.
And the human cost.
Oh.
It's easy to lose sight of that. Groups like human rights activists in Iran are reporting, over 450 deaths inside Iran?
Yeah, the number they documented was 452 since the Israeli attacks started, and official figures are hard to come by.
Meanwhile, Iran retaliated. Missile strikes against Israel. Many intercepted, thankfully, but not all.
No, tragically, some got through. We saw civilian casualties like 90-year-old Bella Ashkenaz near Tel Aviv. It brings the human toll right home.
It really does. And beyond these direct hits, the U.S. military seems to be, positioning itself.
Oh, absolutely. There's serious contingency planning visible. We've tracked significant resource movements. At least 30 American military tanker aircraft shifted from U.S. bases over to Europe.
Tankers. So for refueling jets in the air.
Exactly. Analysts are calling it highly suggestive of preparing for pretty intensive combat operations in the region. It allows planes to stay airborne longer, cover greater distances.
Okay, so the tankers are one sign. What else are we seeing?
Well, there's the deployment of a second aircraft carrier strike group. The USS Carl Vinson is joining the USS Harry S. Truman.
2 carriers in the region. That's a lot of firepower.
It is. Plus, Patriot missile batteries, B-2 stealth bombers sent to Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. It's a clear signal of readiness and capability.
And this capability, it ties into specific potential targets, doesn't it? Like the Fordo facility in Iran.
Precisely. Fordo is a huge point of concern. It's their nuclear enrichment facility, but it's built deep underground, beneath a mountain.
Making it incredibly difficult to strike effectively.
Extremely difficult. And the assessment is that Israel likely can't do it alone. They'd probably need U.S. help, specifically warplanes carrying those heavy-duty bunker buster bombs.
Which puts the U.S. potentially right in the middle of any decision to hit Fordo.
Directly involved, yes. And that really brings us to the core issue, the absolute heart of this crisis, Iran's nuclear program itself.
Okay, so where does Iran stand right now, according to the sources?
Well, the stark fact is, Iran is the only country without nuclear weapons that is producing and stockpiling uranium enriched up to 60%. That's very close to weapons grade.
And that stockpile is growing.
Significantly. It's now at 408.6 kilograms. That's up about 50% just since early February this year, 2025.
Right, and 408 kilograms.
Mm-hmm.
What does that translate to in sort of bomb potential?
Theoretically, it's enough fissile material for 3 nuclear explosive devices. Or if they enrich it further to 90%, which is weapons grade, it could potentially be enough for 9 warheads.
9. And how quickly could they potentially get there, the so-called breakout time?
That's the really alarming part. Estimates now range from weeks down to maybe even 10 to 15 days to produce enough material for 1 bomb.
Weeks or days. That's drastically shorter than it used to be.
Drastically. Under the old nuclear deal, the JCPOA, the estimate was about a year. Now we're talking potentially days. They have the infrastructure, they have the know-how.
Okay, so let's talk about that. The plan of action. Remind us what its purpose was.
Sure. It was signed back in 2015. The basic idea was to put strict, verifiable limits on Iran's nuclear program. In return, international sanctions against Iran would be lifted.
And what were those limits?
They were quite severe. Iran had to get rid of 98% of its low-enriched uranium, keeping only 300 kilograms. They could only enrich uranium up to 3.67%, which is suitable for power plants, not bombs. They had to slash the number of their centrifuges, the machines that do the enriching, by 2/3. And crucially, Fordo, that underground facility we mentioned, was prohibited from enriching uranium at all. Plus, intense inspections by the IAEA.
And these limits were supposed to last
For 15 years under the deal, and back in May 2018, the general view among most observers and intelligence agencies was that the deal was actually working.
Working. So it was keeping that breakout time at around a year.
Yes, that was the assessment. It was seen as a success, largely preventing Iran from making a quick dash for a bomb.
But then President Trump pulled the U.S. out.
Yeah.
May 2018. He called it a horrible one-sided deal.
He did. Unilaterally withdrew the United States. And the consequences, well, they unfolded pretty quickly.
How did Iran respond initially?
They waited about a year, but then started taking steps in retaliation, incrementally at first. They exceeded the uranium stockpile limit, then started enriching beyond the 3.67% cap, resumed activities at facilities that were supposed to be restricted, like Fordo. Then came a major escalation point in early 2020.
The killing of Qasem Soleimani.
Exactly. The Trump administration killed the Iranian major general. Shortly after that, Iran announced it would basically no longer adhere to any of the enrichment limits in the JCPOA.
And that leads us to today's stockpile number.
That's right. The latest figures show Iran's total enriched uranium stockpile is around 5,525 kilograms. That's more than 27 times what the JCPOA permitted.
27 times. Okay. Now, here's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, a bit confusing. The intelligence assessment versus the political talk.
Yeah, there's a real disconnect. The official U.S. intelligence community assessment, delivered by DNI Tulsi Gabbard as recently as March 2025, states clearly, Iran is not building a nuclear weapon.
Building one.
And Supreme Leader Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear weapons program that he suspended back in 2003. And importantly, this isn't a new assessment. It echoes what U.S. intelligence has been saying consistently since 2007.
Since 2007.
Yeah.
Yet you hear very different things from lawmakers, don't you?
You absolutely do. It's quite striking. Senators, both Republicans like Tom Cotton, Todd Young, Mike Rounds, Ted Budd, John Cornyn, and even some Democrats like Mark Kelly, they've heard Gabbard's testimony, but they're making public statements talking about Iran's development of nuclear weapons or saying Iran is on the path to nuclear weapons.
And often using that language to justify supporting Israeli actions or a tougher stance.
Exactly. It fuels that narrative. Vice President J.D. Vance also expressed concern, specifically pointing to Iran enriching well above the threshold for civilian use, and that IAEA report about the 60% enrichment.
And President Trump's reaction to his own DNI's assessment.
Reportedly, quite blunt. I don't care what she said.
Wow. Okay, so that really highlights this split. Intelligence says one thing. Political rhetoric, including from the president, says something else.
It certainly does. It suggests a narrative is being pushed, maybe for policy reasons, that doesn't fully align with the formal intelligence picture.
So, given all of this, the attacks, the nuclear progress, the conflicting messages, what are the sources saying about President Trump's own thinking right now? How's he approaching this decision?
Well, publicly, he's maintained a level of ambiguity. He said no decision yet on whether the U.S. will join any potential Israeli attacks on Iran.
But he's also sounded skeptical about diplomacy.
Yes, saying it's very late to be talking about cutting a deal. And his rhetoric towards Iran has been incredibly tough, talking about unconditional surrender, declaring Iran is not bullies anymore.
He even issued that direct kind of personal threat to Ayatollah Khamenei, didn't he?
He did, saying the U.S. knows his location but isn't going to act, quote, at least not for now. And he made that bold claim about having complete and total control of the skies over Iran.
Which naturally makes you wonder about the current level of U.S. operations or surveillance.
It does raise questions. Now, insights from a senior White House official reported in some analyses suggest Trump views this through a specific lens. He apparently sees this as his last term, a unique window for legacy building.
Legacy building? How so?
By doing what he believes is right and important for the world. The suggestion is he feels less constrained by, say, keeping political coalitions together and more focused on his own conviction about what's right for the country.
And what does right look like in this context, according to that official?
Apparently, he's aiming for something decisive. A definitive end to the war and Iran's nuclear ambitions, not just another temporary ceasefire.
A definitive end? That sounds ambitious. But surely there isn't uniform agreement within his own administration.
Oh, definitely not. There are quite divergent views. On the more hawkish side, you have General Michael Kurilla, the CENTCOM commander. He's described as a hawk of hawks.
Right.
Kurilla's reportedly pushing hard for joint U.S.-Israel operations. He's apparently open to Israeli plans that might combine commando raids with bombing campaigns. His goal seems to be creating this integrated military posture in the region, sometimes called Kurilla's umbrella, to deter Iran.
And he's not alone on that side.
No. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Dan Kane, is also said to be taking the lead with Trump on exploring military options.
Okay, so that's the hawkish view. Who's pumping the brakes?
There are prominent figures counseling restraint. Elbridge Colby, the Undersecretary for Policy, is reportedly against shifting major military assets from Asia, where he sees the main threat as China, to the Middle East.
That makes strategic sense, focusing on the Pacific.
And Vice President J.D. Vance, while concerned about Iran's enrichment, has also voiced wariness about foreign entanglements. He said, people are right to be worried after the last 25 years of idiotic foreign policy, and stressed that Trump only wants to use the military for American people's goals.
And D&I Gabbard, of course, with her consistent assessment that Iran isn't actually building a bomb program.
Exactly. These figures are reportedly arguing for diplomacy, warning about stretched resources, and the potential for a catastrophic wider conflict, a major national security crisis.
Meanwhile, what's Iran saying? How are they reacting to all this pressure and the military posturing?
They're issuing very stark warnings. Iran's foreign ministry spokesman flat out said any American intervention would be a recipe for an all-out war in the region.
No ambiguity there.
None. And Supreme Leader Khamenei himself declared Iran will never surrender and warned that military intervention would cause irreparable damage.
It's worth remembering their past statements too, right, after the Soleimani strike.
Yes, that context is important. Back in January 2020, their foreign minister defended their missile strikes on U.S. bases as self-defense, insisting they didn't seek war but would defend themselves.
And didn't an IRGC commander make some pretty bold claims then?
Right. Amir Hajizadeh, the IRGC aerospace commander, he claimed Iran was ready to fire thousands of missiles if the U.S. had retaliated further back then. He also claimed they could have targeted U.S. troops in their missile strikes but chose not to, saying the real goal was driving U.S. forces out of the region entirely. That was the only fitting revenge, in his words.
So a pattern of defiance and asserting their readiness to retaliate, even asymmetrically. Okay, let's pivot slightly. What can history and maybe the legal framework tell us here?
Well, looking at Trump's maximum pressure campaign, it's a strategy called compellence, trying to force a change in behavior through threats and pain.
Does history suggest that works well against states like Iran?
History is pretty skeptical about its success rate, especially when military superiority alone is relied upon. A key factor is threat credibility.
Meaning, does Iran actually believe the U.S. will follow through?
Exactly. And sources point out reasons for doubt. The U.S. hasn't used direct force against Iran before. There have been mixed signals from officials over time, and President Trump himself campaigned against foreign wars. That can undermine the threat's power.
Some critics are drawing parallels to a much bigger intervention.
They are. The 2003 Iraq War comes up often in these analyses. Critics frame it as an unprovoked, illegal, offensive, unilateral war of aggression, launched based on, well, lies about non-existent weapons of mass destruction.
And the consequences of that war were just devastating.
Catastrophic is the word used. Estimates run to 1.2 million deaths, over 9 million people displaced, and a financial cost to the U.S. exceeding $3 trillion. That's the kind of outcome critics fear repeating with Iran.
Okay, shifting to the legal side within the U.S., does a president actually have the authority to just launch an attack on Iran?
It's a really critical question. Constitutionally, the power to use military force generally comes from Congress through things like an authorization for use of military force, or AUMF, or from the president's inherent powers under Article 2.
And is there an AUMF that covers Iran?
No. That's the clear point made in the sources. Neither the 2001 AUMF passed after 9/11, nor the 2002 AUMF authorizing the Iraq War provides legal authorization for military force against the nation-state of Iran today.
But the executive branch often interprets its own powers broadly.
Very broadly. They often argue the president can use force under Article 2 to protect important national interests, provided the action doesn't rise to the level of war in the constitutional sense.
Which means What's the definition of war in that context?
The definition usually cited involves prolonged and substantial military engagements, things that expose U.S. troops to significant risk over a substantial period, attacking a country like Iran with its capacity to retaliate and escalate. Well, that certainly starts to look like it approaches that constitutional threshold.
So Congress should be involved. What about the War Powers Resolution?
Right. The War Powers Resolution of 1973 was passed specifically to ensure the collective judgment of both Congress and the President before committing U.S. forces to hostilities. It sets requirements for consultation, reporting.
And that 60-day clock, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It limits hostilities to 60 days unless Congress explicitly authorizes them or declares war, though presidents of both parties have often disputed its constitutionality.
Has Congress tried to assert itself more recently regarding Iran?
Yes, there have been notable bipartisan efforts. Resolutions stating there's no authority for war with Iran, amendments proposed to defense bills trying to cut off funding for any military action against Iran unless Congress approves it first. Using the power of the purse is seen as perhaps more effective check.
Interesting. So, legal debates, strategic debates. But what about the American people? Where do they stand, particularly Trump's base?
That's another crucial piece. Recent polling indicates that Trump voters specifically don't want U.S. involved in Israel's war on Iran.
Really? So despite the tough rhetoric, his base might be wary of another Middle East war.
That seems to be the sentiment reflected in those polls. It aligns, actually, with some of those voices counseling restraint within the administration, like VP Vance mentioning worries about foreign entanglement.
So wrapping this up, we've seen how this standoff is really a product of history, past decisions like leaving the JCPOA, current actions, and very different interpretations of intelligence.
Absolutely. And a complex mix of political calculations here in the U.S., strategic goals, and these deep historical precedents. The sources show really strongly held but often conflicting beliefs about the right way forward.
It leaves us with a tough question, doesn't it? If big diplomatic deals like the JCPOA struggled, and coercive pressure hasn't definitively worked, and a full-on war seems potentially catastrophic.
What options are actually left? How do you ensure regional stability and stop proliferation without resorting to those extremes? And maybe even more fundamentally, what would success even look like in this incredibly tangled situation?
A difficult puzzle indeed. Definitely something to keep thinking about as this situation continues to develop.